Good morning, everyone. I hope your day is going well. So, a new Poppy Playtime chapter dropped at the beginning of this year, and I've seen a lot of people talking about it. But something that I've noticed is most of that conversation is centered around the game mechanically, how it functions or doesn't function. And while this discussion of glitches and quality of life is important, something that I feel has been left behind is talking about the actual story the chapter's trying to present. If it's brought up at all, it's usually seen as the chapter's redeeming quality, something that remained solid even though all of these game-breaking glitches kept happening. And I wanted to make a video about this because, unfortunately for Poppy Playtime, I disagree. I think the story in this chapter is a major step back in quality, and it makes me a little worried about the direction the series is going. Don't get me wrong, there are some really good ideas in this chapter, but the way the narrative is laid out is so messy and poorly communicated that all that potential is lost. So I'm going to be doing my best to analyze what this chapter was trying to do and why it doesn't necessarily succeed. I just want to make it clear that this video is just about the story of the chapter. I think there are plenty of other videos that go into depth about the technical issues, so I just want to talk about the writing issues for my part. Originally, I'd wanted to play the game myself so I could at least give my 2 cents on the glitches, but all of these chapters together total to almost $50, which, fun fact, is a quarter of my student loan payment. And as much as I value academic honesty, I don't feel comfortable shelling that much out right now. I'll inevitably talk about gameplay a bit, just because this is a video game and the gameplay is part of how you deliver the story to the player, but I'll be doing my best to not talk about things I have no business talking about. If you'd like to support me to make sure I can get games regardless of whether or not I like them, consider supporting me on Patreon. Any updates I have on what I'm doing go on Patreon first, and there's a ton of behind the scenes and early access stuff there as well. Literally anything is helpful, and I would appreciate it so much. If Patreon is out of your budget right now, that's totally fine. Subscribing is free, and it really helps me make sure that the YouTube algorithm is treating me right. With all of that said, I think it's time to get started. Grab some water, snacks, whatever you like, and get comfortable. Come with me, and we'll analyze the story of Poppy Playtime, Chapter 4. In order to talk about Chapter 4, we have to talk about the other chapters as well, because Poppy Playtime is a little weird structurally. Because this is a game releasing chapter by chapter, the story is a little weird pacing-wise. And if I'm being completely honest, it doesn't really get started until Chapter 3. Chapter 1 was essentially just a demo. It was short and simple, and just introduced the base concept without giving you much detail on anything. Chapter 2 did a great job of expanding things both in size and characters that have more than one voice line, but it was still pretty bare bones in terms of narrative. Chapter 3 is the first time I think the game really hits its stride. In terms of story and execution, I think this chapter is really good. And part of what allows it to be good is its focus. This is a chapter that knows what it's trying to do. It knows what it wants to be and what it wants to tell us. And everything it's trying to tell us is centered around the main villain of Catnap. This chapter is trying to introduce some deeper themes than those we've seen previously. Things like revenge, obsession, the past coming back to haunt you. And what allows it to be effective is that everything leads back to a central character, so it allows us to explore the different layers of storytelling much more easily than if we had 3 or 4 intertwining plot lines. It has a lot it wants to show and tell us, but it's restrained enough that nothing overstays its welcome, and all the different elements end up being very cohesive. You're also actually participating in the narrative in Chapter 3, not just finding remnants of events that have happened a long time ago. This allows the chapter to pull you in and get you interested in a way that none of the other chapters have managed to. Catnap is a very good monster. He has an incredibly creepy design, and the chapter does a good job of making it feel like he's constantly stalking you. But what really makes him compelling and deep as a character is his relationship with the prototype. The prototype has been part of Poppy Playtime's lore from the start. He was mentioned even way back in the demo of Chapter 1, and it was clear by Chapter 3 that he was intended to be the final big bad of the series. Catnap, in turn, is a devout follower of the prototype, having been saved by him and doing his bidding unquestioningly ever since. This is not only an interesting dynamic to explore, but it's a very smart choice structurally. It makes us wonder what the prototype's greater plan is. And Catnap seeing the prototype as his god allows the prototype to remain the most significant villain without undermining the threat that Catnap has in this chapter. Because these two are so deeply connected, it allows a chapter completely about Catnap to also show us new shades of the prototype, with more complexity and intrigue than you can really get from just finding a videotape talking about the two, which makes the prototype killing him at the end of the chapter all the more shocking. This final twist is emblematic of what the entire chapter is trying to show us. Chapter 3 is about us diving deep into Playcare and seeing what horrible things are left behind by Playtime Co. It wants us to see the monsters we've been facing fully in the light, to understand the awful slaughter that took place and feel the weight of it. It's like Poppy said, terrible things have happened here, and all that's left after the hour of joy is death and hunger. Poppy, and perhaps also the audience, seem to believe that whatever humanity was once in these creatures is long gone. And at this point, we're the only ones who can hunt down the prototype and make things right. Chapter 4 does its best to build on this idea by subverting it, or at the very least, giving it more complexity than just us versus the monsters. We've always technically known that Huggy Wuggy and Catnap used to be children, but it's never really felt important. Let's be honest, this is a mascot horror game. As soon as we found out that this company had run an orphanage, we knew that these children were being put through meat grinders. Obviously, in an ambiguous sense, you know that children suffering is bad, but this genre has gotten to the point where you don't really feel the impact of it. But this chapter puts that suffering front and center. They want us to think about this in a way that's real and tangible. These were children. They were young and scared, and they didn't understand what was going on. They were abused and experimented on and torn apart over and over by people who claimed to be doing it for the sake of progress, saying that it was something that would help a lot of people one day, as if that could be any justification for what they were doing. And in the face of all this, the Hour of Joy starts to feel less like a massacre and more like justice being served. This chapter has us thinking that maybe there was no one in this entire factory worth saving. Or at the very least, that's what some of the people who worked here think. With all this new context and the chapter forcing us to actually consider the tragedy of it all, we're forced to start questioning if what we're doing is the right thing. Poppy has framed us killing Huggy, Mommy, and Catnap as a good thing, and maybe it technically is, but what good has it actually done anyone? The toys trapped in the safe haven are still starving and terrified, and everyone who used to work here is still dead. And these one-chapter monsters you've been killing without a thought used to be children. Regardless of whether or not you still consider them as such, they're clearly sentient beings who have thoughts and feelings about the world around them. Are you really a good person for coming in here and doing all of this? The question that Chapter 4 is trying to ask us is, who is the real monster? It wants to show us that there isn't just one side that's right. It wants you to start thinking about its story in a deeper and more complex way. And I love the direction it's attempting to take. But unfortunately, this attempt at complexity falls completely flat. I've explained what the chapter is trying to do, but in practice, none of these big ideas come across very well or hit on an emotional level. And one of the biggest reasons for that is that the game is asking you to think about the consequences of what you've done, but you, the player, haven't been able to impact the direction of the narrative the entire time you've been playing. The game is trying to get you to think about the consequences of the choices you've made, but Poppy Playtime is not a game about making choices. There hasn't been a single choice since you got here. The game acts like you staying here to help Poppy is some sort of decision you're actively making, but it's not. There's never been a point where we're told we can leave or do anything else. Doing what the game tells you to do is not a choice you're making, it's following instructions. And this lack of agency is a big problem if you're trying to get your audience to consider consequences. How are you supposed to feel monstrous if you're just doing what someone else told you to do? There's a very strange moment in the chapter where the doctor presents you with a nightmare critter and tells you that in order to escape this room, you have to kill it. I think the point is that he's trying to prove to you that killing others is necessary for survival, and so he's not guilty of anything. And I think it's also intended to be a moment of self-reflection where we consider if we'd be willing to kill another living being if we were placed in this situation. But it falls completely flat. Firstly, there's no indication that killing this critter is something you can say no to. Up until this point, every choice the game has given us is actually just, do what we tell you or you're gonna die now. There's no reason to assume that this situation is anything different, so having the doctor place such moral weight on it ends up feeling more condescending than anything else.
Is maintaining the veil of your morality more important? Act quickly.
Who told you I have any morality?
That brutish glob of clay would do it. Poppy would do it.
I'm gonna do it as well.
Is maintaining the veil of your morality more important?
Dude, it's just a video game.
Act quickly.
I'm not too worried about it, honestly.
Secondly, there's no real reason to not kill the toy in this scenario. This isn't a character we got to know or have even really met. In fact, we've gone in the complete opposite direction and picked possibly the most evil-looking toy we could have and put them under blood-red mood lighting. From a player perspective, this thing looks like it's supposed to die. If this had been one of the critters from the safe haven and they were shaking and actively asking us not to do it, the scene would instantly become 10 times more effective. It still wouldn't be that effective because the chapter didn't take any time to emotionally connect us with the safe haven, but I'll get to that later. The third and big problem with this sequence is that this is the only choice we've been given in the game's entire runtime. In a chapter that's supposed to be about thinking about the things you've done, it feels a little weird that this is all we get. We don't feel any attachment to our actions because we've just been doing what we're told this whole time. Sure, theoretically it's a bad thing to do, but this is a video game, and it's the only option that many players can see, further detaching them from any sort of ethical quandary. This isn't necessarily a problem specific to Poppy Playtime. Morality in video games is really hard. It's tricky to get a player invested enough that they feel like their actions actually affect the world, and it's even more difficult to get them to want to make good decisions. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. Even though Poppy Playtime hasn't had any choice-based mechanics up until this point, that doesn't mean you can't implement them. And if you implement it correctly, it could do a lot to support the story you're trying to tell, and allow the player to engage with the world in a way they haven't been able to before. Just as an example, let's say that after you arrive at Safe Haven and have a talk with Poppy, you're about to go explore when Doey stops you. He explains that you're free to roam around, but there's a lot of traumatized toys living here, and they might be nervous if you look so much like a past employee. So would you be willing to remove your grab pack while you're in the safe haven? And then you give the player a prompt and an actual choice on whether they want to keep the grab pack or not. And this isn't a situation where you have a secret enemy so you're punishing the player for giving it up. That's not what this moment is for. If your game has had no choice-based mechanics up until this point, it's really important that you get in their face about what you're introducing, and this is a way to do that. You're basically going right up to them and saying, hey, we're giving you choices now. Do you want to give Doey your grab pack? Yes or no? And then you'll have some players saying that they don't trust this and the grab pack is their only tool, so they're gonna keep it. And other players are thinking, well, this is a safe area, so it's probably fine if I give it up. And then Doey reacts to that choice, either by warily allowing you to keep it while warning you that people might not be as friendly, or getting really happy and saying he appreciates it and promising he'll keep an eye on it. And then the player feels like they're having an effect on a character relationship, which is, again, something we haven't seen before. This primes them to start looking for choices, to start thinking about what they want to do and not just what they need to do to make progress. You could even change the dialogue and tone of those in the safe haven depending on whether or not the player has the grab pack. This is just one example, but I think adding small moments like this could do a lot to make people actually think about what they're doing and actually feel like their actions are things they're doing rather than just what you need to do to make the story happen. And listen, I don't know how video games are made, and adding these probably isn't as simple as I'm implying. But you found like 7 new places to put your shimmy through small spaces mechanic, so I feel like you could find some places to implement something like this if you want to. And I think it's important to do so if you want your question of who the real monster is to actually hit on an emotional level. And putting in something like this would also give you other opportunities, such as character exploration. Because even though this chapter has a lot of really interesting character ideas, it doesn't really do anything with them, and that makes me sad. You can attach character interactions to these choice-based moments, which allows you to explore dynamics in a way you haven't been able to before. The example choice I came up with could be a way of establishing the tension between Doey and Poppy, because these two have a really interesting relationship in this chapter that I wish was explored more. Poppy has a plan to burn everything down and destroy the prototype. It seems like this is a plan she's had for a while and Doey was initially on board, but right now he's having second thoughts. He's been caring for the toys of Safe Haven for years now, and he doesn't like the idea of all of them dying. He sees the humanity and value in the toys that Poppy doesn't, and that's interesting. This is honestly the perfect setup if you want people to start thinking about what the right thing to do is. What's more important, protecting the little good that exists in this world, or doing whatever it takes to kill the evil? The only thing the original chapter does with this setup is have Poppy and Doey repeat the same argument 2 or 3 times, which I find pretty disappointing and repetitive.
I know the others might believe it's right, that we should bury everything, but let's just think about it. I think you might be wrong, Poppy. What you want...
It's the best for everyone, Doey. That no trace of this place is left. We agree to that. Now's the time to get to the Foundation. Make everything ready.
Look, we need to talk about this. We shouldn't... Just give it a second.
You can use the give up the grab pack yes or no choice as a way of establishing the tension in a way that isn't just them repeating a one-sentence summary of their worldview over and over. When Doey asks if you'll give up your grab pack, Poppy interjects, telling Doey that it's fine, she trusts us. And Doey responds that that's great, but he still thinks the toys would be more comfortable if we didn't have it, which prompts Poppy to say, well, I say it's fine. You can trust me, so you can trust them too, right? At which point, Doey gets a little frustrated and says something to the effect of, Poppy, I'm glad you're back. I really am. It's good to see you. But you don't know what's going on here. You don't get to disappear for years, then show up and act like you're in charge. Why don't we let our new friend decide what they want to do? This tells us something about both Poppy and Doey without it being so overt. Poppy is taken aback by Doey's resistance because she's not used to people talking to her that way. She's used to being in charge, and she's really not used to Doey making decisions without deferring to her. Something that's been implied but not really explored is the fact that Poppy is a selfish character. She seems to think she's doing what's best for everyone, but it's clear through her actions that she's really doing what's best for her. This doesn't necessarily make her evil, but it's an aspect of her personality that can't really be ignored. In this moment, she's not focusing on how these other toys might feel. She's just thinking about the fact that she knows we're good, so everyone else should just go along with it. As for Doey, he says several times in the original chapter that these toys are his family, and safe haven is important to him, but we don't get to see him actually be a caretaker for them. The closest we get is him running off to investigate the latest prototype scare, which isn't very personal and kind of feels like an excuse to get him to leave the room for a while. This theoretical moment where he stands his ground and doesn't immediately bend to Poppy's opinion would show just how dedicated he is to what's best for Safe Haven. He's putting their needs first in a way that Poppy just isn't. It shows very clearly that Poppy is out of touch with the people that are supposed to be her allies, and it establishes the tension between the two in a way that I think is more subtle and interesting than just having the same copy-paste conversation a few times. After this verbal altercation leaves Poppy a little off balance and us intrigued, Doey turns back to us and asks what we want to do. Poppy, in an attempt to stay relevant, quickly breaks in to tell us that you don't have to do anything you don't want to, which gets her a bit of a side eye. And then you get a prompt on screen: give the grab pack to Doey or keep the grab pack. Now the decision isn't just based on what you think will happen in the game, it feels like something that can affect your relationship with two very different characters. Which of course primes you to think about the deeper themes of the chapter. Poppy and Doey represent opposing perspectives, and with this interaction, the game is essentially asking players to think about what perspective they agree with. And it prompts you to start thinking about everything. Has what you've done actually helped anyone? Or are we just Poppy's obedient little lapdog? Dr. Harley Sawyer, ostensibly the main villain of this chapter, has some final words that should be a gut punch.
You saved no one.
You saved no one. This is supposed to be a moment that hits you, and if the chapter had properly built up its themes, it would do exactly that. You're trying to get the Omni-Hand so Poppy can go through with her kamikaze plan, and if you already doubt what she's doing, the doctor's last words turn an already uncertain fight into a deep pit in your stomach. But because this chapter doesn't actually do anything with its interesting themes, this potentially effective moment is just nothing. Because we had no control over how we got here or anything, really, we don't feel anything about the actions we take, because this game has failed to get us immersed and invested. The chapter feels almost performative with its themes, throwing out an interesting idea while being completely uninterested in actually saying anything. And as someone who wants this game to keep improving, that's really discouraging. And I know they can do better because they did with Chapter 3. So overall, the lack of interest in exploring the ideas it puts forward is really disappointing. Speaking of things that are disappointing, we need to talk about Dr. Sawyer. As my husband put it, design and concept, very cool. Execution, wasted. I talked about Chapter 3 and how its ability to focus on Catnap as a villain really helped the chapter feel cohesive and effective. Well, Chapter 4 happens to have a big problem with focus. The Doctor is theoretically the main villain, but he's not treated like it. In fact, it's hard to say what the focus of Chapter 4 is supposed to be. The Doctor is fighting for space in the chapter with Poppy, Doey, Yarnaby, and the prototype. Okay, Yarnaby is more of a mascot than an actual character with presence, but him being there definitely isn't helping the crowding problem. I'm not attempting to imply that Poppy Playtime can't have secondary characters. Miss Delight and Dog Day are fan favorites that both work really well in their own right. But the difference between these characters and those in Chapter 4 is something that I've already mentioned: restraint. Chapter 3's secondary characters are actually secondary. They function as small parts of a cohesive whole, allowing them to shine while not taking away from the main plot that's happening. By contrast, Chapter 4 feels like the writers didn't know who they wanted to write their story about, so they tried to make it about everyone. And as a result, we get a lukewarm mess that doesn't allow any character or story element to reach its full potential. Because I always call him Harvey, but I think his name is Harley? One second. Poppy Playtime Chapter 4 Doctor. Harley. It is Harley. Okay. Dr. Harley Sawyer has the potential to be a very cool and interesting character. Narratively, he is the perfect villain to have for a story that wants us to think about who the real monster is. He's objectively a horrible person. He is responsible for starting the whole Bigger Bodies initiative, the entire reason that these children were brutally experimented on, and he's really not remorseful about it. But that's what makes it interesting. The Doctor knows what he did is wrong, but in his mind, the toys are just as bad as he is. The only difference he sees is that he's committing atrocities in the name of some sort of greater good.
The only difference between her and I, the only difference, is that I actually gains humanity something. Otherwise, what was any of this work?
He's in this weird space of understanding that he's done awful things, but still seeing himself as the victim. A genius whose success was stolen out from under him, forced to live in a hell his own monsters have created. And maybe the most interesting thing of all is that he believes that we're exactly like him. As far as he's concerned, he has the moral high ground, because at least he doesn't pretend to be some sort of hero. He sees us trying to do good and sneers. He says, "No, you're not doing any good at all. You tell yourself you're better than me, but you're not. We're all the same deep down, tearing each other apart to survive. You saved no one." And this type of character and rhetoric would be super, super effective for what the chapter's going for. But unfortunately, we don't spend enough time with the Doctor for any of these ideas to properly develop. And I mean that literally. Dr. Sawyer is supposed to be able to watch and control everything on this level except the safe haven, but there are huge swaths of time where he's just not there. I'm not really getting the sense that this guy is all powerful when you can go like an hour without ever hearing from him.
Ah, and here you are. Just as I expected. It appears you are every bit what the prototype fears.
Other enemies in the series with a controlling personality or an emphasis on stalking don't really seem to have this issue. Mommy Longlegs was the definition of a helicopter mom, twisting your arm and generally just making things really weird the whole time. Catnap is more subtle than that, but he appears enough that it really gives the impression that he's always around, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Doctor is supposed to be this eye in the sky, always spying on us through the cameras, but he's absent for so much of this chapter that he ends up feeling entirely irrelevant. I find it especially weird that he doesn't have any appearance in the Yarnaby boss fight. He specifically says he'll be taking notes as Yarnaby hunts us, so why isn't he playing Peanut Gallery when Yarnaby is using his Mega Vision Cone to kill players through walls? Look, I'm not usually one to encourage developers to make a character annoying, but this man should have been up in our business constantly. This is an egomaniac who spent the last 10 years with only his dog and his boss for company, and you're telling me that he's not taking the opportunity to call you stupid every time you make a puzzle mistake? Having him around and constantly judging you would give him the presence to be an actual character instead of just a neat concept. And it would allow Safe Haven to feel like Safe Haven because it's one of the only places where the Doctor can't butt in and insult your intelligence whenever he feels like it. You'd finally be getting a break from this pretentious insult to ethics, and it would make you want to protect the Safe Haven at all costs. And maybe you don't want to go in this direction and make him annoying, and that's completely fair. Something as simple as having his eyes appear on different monitors as you explore would achieve the same always feeling watched effect, and it would do wonders in making him feel like the actual master of the machine he's intended to be. As it is, he just doesn't have the presence necessary to make his character work as intended. Also, this is a tangent, but I kind of wish they'd kept it a secret that the Doctor had a body at all. I know that's kind of hard to do because they specifically had promotional material with his TV head and sticky body and whatever, but I don't know. I just think it would have been cool if this whole time we thought we were just going to unplug him, and then suddenly he has you by the neck and is throwing you across the room, you know? I just feel like that would have been a really effective twist, and it would have made this moment an actual jump scare instead of just something. But anyway, the Doctor doesn't manage to do what he wanted to within the story, but what he does manage to do is undermine the final antagonist of the game. Every other chapter antagonist up until now has built up the prototype as the ultimate final boss. An enemy that's cunning, powerful, ruthless. Catnap was especially effective at establishing this because he was such a threatening presence. Having him ultimately be killed by his own master is essentially the game saying, "Oh, you thought Catnap was scary? Well, he's nothing compared to the prototype, so have fun with that." It's extremely efficient storytelling that serves the broader narrative. The Doctor, on the other hand, does a very good job of making the prototype feel flat and unthreatening. We're only witness to one interaction between the two, and it feels less like a terrifying monster addressing its underling, and more like a disgruntled employee having an overly polite conversation with their supervisor.
Have I made an error in allowing your survival?
Of course not. We just need more time to perfect the time.
Time is precisely what we do not have.
Then I suggest you find some more. That will give me labs access. At least with the two of us.
That is out of the question.
You will still want. Fine.
The Doctor is addressing what is supposed to be the ultimate big bad of the entire story, but he can't summon any emotion beyond bored and vaguely annoyed. And you know, I get it. You don't want the dynamic between these two to feel like you just copied Chapter 3, and you don't want your new villain to feel like a chump in his own chapter. But I feel like having this tape play out this way really hurts our perception of the prototype. The game has been working really hard to keep this character mysterious, with any new information we get just making him more terrifying. To put in all that effort and then have the Doctor treat him so casually feels like a bit of a misstep, and I find it frustrating because there's a really easy way to fix it. Just have him sound scared in this recording. He doesn't need to be shaking in his boots or anything, but have him sound cautious, nervous even. His request to use the lab is one he makes carefully, and he immediately backs down and tries to appease the prototype with other options when he's forcefully told no. Imagine how effective this would be at establishing the prototype as a threat. Harley's been a smarmy know-it-all the entire chapter, but in this moment, facing the prototype, he's meek and careful, walking on eggshells because he knows that this thing he made is incredibly volatile, and one wrong move can result in him becoming a red smear on the floor. And having him act like this wouldn't take away from his presence throughout the chapter, because by the time you find this tape, he's already dead. Even though Harley and the prototype are working together, this is the only time we hear about it, so it's really important to make this interaction count. And speaking of that, I think we need to talk about this chapter's problem with presenting information. In theory, I don't mind videotapes and notes being used to give the player information. They can be fun to find, and it's a cool way of giving the player extra context about the world. But I think they become a problem if they're the only way you get any context. As far as I can tell, all the tapes and notes in Chapter 4 are optional. This is theoretically fine if the only thing on these tapes is fun Easter eggs and extra world building. But that's not the case. Skipping the tapes in Chapter 4 results in a significantly worse story experience. You miss out on important plot details, emotional character moments, huge fan theory confirmations. Some of these tapes are really easy to miss too, making understanding the overarching narrative much harder than it should be. I personally believe that if a player's enjoyment and understanding of your story relies on finding a specific item, then finding that item should be mandatory. And if your story only makes sense by making 40 minutes worth of tapes mandatory, then why not just make the information on the tapes part of normal gameplay? Like, instead of having the player stop and listen to an out-of-context conversation from 10 years ago, you just have characters tell them what's happening. Chapter 3 tells a compelling story without you needing to find any tapes or notes. They're a fun bonus, obviously, but you don't need them to understand what's happening. The opening cutscene shows us that Catnap is around and someone to be wary of. Other characters are quick to tell us how dangerous he is, and Catnap himself is more than willing to show us. Ollie fills you in on Catnap's backstory and relationship with the prototype, and Poppy gives us even more information, with her ultimately revealing the Hour of Joy, setting us up for the story to come. And the dream sequences give us some tantalizing mysteries in a way that's extremely engaging. The chapter does an excellent job of setting up its own story, while also getting excited for what's to come later. Contrast this with Chapter 4 and the Doctor. Why exactly should I care about this guy? Like, I generally understand why, right? He's the one who did all these horrible experiments. But that's weirdly not brought up very often. When people talk about him, he's not the one keeping us trapped here or the sick scientist who put children through meat grinders. He's the guy we need to steal something from, which again is fine theoretically, but this attitude combined with him not being around to hype himself up means his backstory has no real punch to it. Learning about Catnap's backstory gave his character a new dimension. He was a kid trying to help his friend escape, but he got hurt, so the prototype brought him back instead of running away. So we understand where he's coming from, even though he's trying to kill us, and it gives us some juicy tidbits about the prototype. Did he genuinely see Catnap as a friend, and so killed him in a bizarre act of mercy? Or has Catnap simply outlived his usefulness? We don't know, and that ambiguity is interesting, and everyone can enjoy it because everyone who played the game was presented with the same information, regardless of how much lore hunting they did. Whereas with Harley, some of his most interesting backstory stuff is confined to random notes and videotapes. For example, there's a document you can find where the Doctor talks about Yarnaby. This note does a lot to characterize the Doctor. It shows that he's prideful, callous, manipulative, cruel. My question is, why is this a note and not something the Doctor tells us? This is some theoretically good characterization that loses a lot of punch because it's in text form. And I feel like the inherent evil of the Doctor would come across better if his isolation and manipulation of Yarnaby was something he bragged about. What if Yarnaby's introduction was more than him just jumping at the glass and the Doctor piecing out for an hour? Here, let me show you. The others you've faced: 1170, 1188, 1222. Been there, done that. Let's try our hand at something a little different. Experiment 1166. Yarnaby. An early sign of progress in the initiative. I'll admit I was disappointed at first. I had chosen the subject specifically for this experiment, and yet none of the behaviors I had observed seemed to remain following the operation. 1166 was physically correct, yes, but it lacked the willingness for violence that I had expected. The orphanage counselors described an antisocial personality with a concerning habit of removing the heads of various stuffed animals. And yet, this creature seemed entirely docile, content to sit in the corner and watch me work, playing its funny little music. Amusing as it was not a satisfactory result. I tried multiple operations to bring out what I had seen, but each new attempt brought forth nothing but a whimpering mess. After much testing, I was forced to conclude that the counselors had been mistaken. The subject was not an antisocial deviant, but merely a shy child with an odd method of play. A most disappointing revelation. But science is adaptable. Over time, I began to see Experiment 116's true potential. It expressed loyalty to a select number of staff who nauseatingly felt a sort of sympathy for it. What that meant was that its will could be bent. It felt. It feared. From there, it was easy to instill certain behaviors. After only a few short weeks of conditioning, I was its entire world. Experiment 1166 answers only to me. It is swift, strong, and unfailingly persistent. And I've given it the order to tear you into twitching, bloody pieces. Do keep this interesting for me. I'll be taking notes. And then the first Yarnaby sequence could play out. I personally think that something like this is much more effective at establishing a character than finding a random note talking about them. You could even have the note recording what happened in extremely dry scientific terms and have him monologue about it immediately after you find it. Rather than just showing or telling, it's doing both. I bring all this up because it really feels like Chapter 4 is using these tapes and notes as a crutch, telling the story through strategically placed exposition dumps instead of organically integrating it into gameplay. It's impossible to get the full story experience in Chapter 4 without collecting the majority of tapes, and that feels so backwards to me because it's almost like you're hiding the compelling elements of your story. There's important and impactful information that gets purposefully tucked away here. How are people meant to be invested in the cool parts of your story if you keep shoving them under a rug? I'm not saying you need to remove the use of tapes altogether. They're an iconic part of the franchise, and they can function as very effective bits of horror and storytelling devices. I'm just suggesting that maybe something as important as a character's backstory should be mentioned in more places than a single tape on a shelf. Which of course brings us to everyone's favorite bread boy, Doey the Doughman.
He's stretch you, he's gum you, he's squish you, he's fun you. D-O-E-Y. He's seal you, he's glue you, he's stick you, he's glue you. D-O-E-Y. Look at all the colors. So many toys and one. Triple time the friend and triple time the fun. D-O-E-Y. Love it till the day that you
Doey as a character is theoretically very cool. He works as a concept, and the idea of 3 kids being trapped in one bigger body is really interesting. But here's the thing. Doey having 3 different people inside him is something that's barely addressed in-game. Sure, he's a bit temperamental and he has some off mood swings sometimes, but that's about the extent of what you get. Any weirdness in his dialogue can be dismissed as him just feeling really stressed out all the time, which is understandable because he's been the last line of defense against what is essentially the boogeyman for 10 years. There's not really any implication that he has separate personalities unless you're viewing his actions specifically through that lens. And even if you are picking up on it, it doesn't really affect anything in the way you'd expect it to. Because this aspect of his backstory should be a big deal, right? It feels like it should be significant, but it just goes completely unmentioned by anyone in the story. You only find out about it if you take the time in this one room to read the note and listen to the tape, and then it's never brought up again. I've talked a lot about Chapter 3 in this video and how its story is structured in a way that allows it to be good. Everything centers on Catnap and his relationship with the prototype. You can't separate that idea from what goes on in the chapter because it's so important. Even when you're talking to secondary antagonists, Catnap is part of it. Regardless of anything else that happens, this is the main through line that connects everything. Now imagine if the only place this relationship was mentioned was in this one tape you find when you enter the playhouse. It's honestly pretty difficult to imagine, because this is very important for the overall narrative, and it'd be really dumb if Catnap and his worship of the prototype was only mentioned in one place that's really easy to miss. But that's exactly what happens with Doey and his backstory. If you miss the obligatory tape of exposition, there's no reason to believe that Doey is any different from other experiments. Given the context of the opening VHS tape, most players would just assume he was a traumatized Jack, kind of grown up. And this lack of clarity bothers me because it's so much wasted potential. It's a super interesting idea that should have been given more time to develop. It's especially sad because Doey as a concept works really well with the chapter's attempted themes. The chapter is asking who is the real monster, and Doey is a big part of making that question possible because up until this point, there's been no reason to see any of these chapters' antagonists as anything other than monsters that need to be killed. Catnap had some tragic backstory, sure. But the fact that he used to be a child doesn't change the fact that he's actively hunting you. Huggy, Mommy, and Catnap are all designed to be threatening. The primary emotion we're supposed to feel when interacting with them is fear and unease. They might have been children once, but that's not really an implication that there's something left worth saving. But Doey isn't like that, and that's on purpose. He's not supposed to be something we inherently fear. More than any other character, he's intended to represent the humanity of the toys. The first meeting with him is a little scary. His way of saving us involves ripping apart and eating Pianosaurus, so we definitely get the impression that he could kill us if he wanted to. But the point here is that he's a contrast to every other big monster we've met. He doesn't attack us. He doesn't try to manipulate or trap you or anything like that. He's goofy and likable and protective of those weaker than him. He's spent years putting aside his personal needs and desires as he does his best to fulfill the role of caretaker for children barely younger than him. His entire motivation and personality are meant to make you think, to make you consider that these things aren't just monsters, they're people, and you've been killing them. Was that ever a good thing to do? And him being made of 3 different people would only deepen this idea. If we break down the themes even further beyond who's the real monster, Chapter 4 is a chapter about identity, about the loss of it, what people become when their defining characteristics are taken away from them, how what we do makes us what we are. Doey has 3 different, sometimes contradicting personalities in his mind. He's a being that's trying to figure out how to exist, and that could represent the idea of struggling with identity beautifully. But unfortunately, Doey has the exact same problem as the Doctor. none of this potential is given the proper time to develop into something tangible. Matthew, Kevin, and Jack should function as complete characters within their own right, but they're just not that well established. Matthew is the leader, Kevin is angry, and Jack is sad, and that's pretty much all you get from them. It would have been really interesting if these three characters were allowed to exist as complete characters in their own right, but as it is, they feel flat. The one I'm honestly most disappointed about is Kevin, because he's been labeled as a problem child, but no child is just a straight problem. I would have really liked to see what was actually going on with him, and see his anger come out in a way that was protective and not just destructive. And sidebar, can you imagine how cool it would have been if in the final fight, all three of these characters wanted us dead? 3 entirely different characters coming together and blaming us for something awful would have hit really hard. But it just doesn't get to be as interesting as it easily could have. We don't spend enough time with Doey or any of those he's made up of to have his death hit. I've watched other people play and they liked Doey well enough and were sad when he died, but I don't think it hit anywhere near as hard as it should have. This moment should have been absolutely gut-wrenching. It should have made you want to puke and stare at a wall for a while. You should have felt like a horrible person when this happened, because that's what this chapter wants to do. It wants you to feel like what you're doing can cause actual harm. And Doey dying should have done that because he's the only monster that wasn't a monster. He was our friend, and then we had to kill him, and that's awful. But because we barely spent any time with him and processing the fact that he's also a victim, he just becomes another boss fight that is a little tedious to get through. Another thing that keeps his character from working so well is that the safe haven isn't established as the safe haven. Doey's entire reason for snapping is because it gets destroyed, but the safe haven never got to feel like an actual place. None of these toys feel like real characters, they just feel like props that stand in generic poses. The first interaction isn't technically that bad. You arrive in a tense situation, so no one really wants to talk to you, but this is the only interaction with any of the toys that you get, and it doesn't help you emotionally connect with the place you're supposed to be protecting. When it comes to being in Safe Haven, you can wander around and see some things, but there's nothing else. And then Doey sends you to do the Yarnaby boss fight, you come back, and then immediately leave to do another boss fight. And then you come back, and then leave to go set charges, and then it's dead. There are no moments in here that make you feel like this is a place worth protecting. As with most things in this chapter, the concept works, but the execution doesn't give it the support it needs. There's no reason to feel attached to this place in any sense. We understand logically why Doey's upset to lose it, but there's no feeling attached to this moment. You had an indirect hand in destroying this place, and that should have felt awful, because these were children, and now they're all dead. But you just don't, because you don't feel any attachment to any of it. I've heard some rumors that the safe haven was supposed to have more in it. Like there was supposed to be a side quest where you find a book for Doey to read to the critters. I haven't been able to find where this rumor originated, and I don't have any confirmation that this was actually the plan, but doing something like that would have done a lot for this chapter. It would have helped to humanize the other toys of this place in a way that no other event could have. They'd stop feeling like random NPCs that aren't characters and start to feel like kids. Especially with Doey reading to them, you'd see them as children and want to protect them. If you don't want to include the side quest with Doey, you don't have to do that, but you should do something. Like, I don't know, maybe this unicorn could ask you to build a little ramp she can get up so she can draw on a part of the walls that she hasn't yet. And then when you do it, she says thank you, and suddenly the toys actually have a personality, and it's charming and sweet, and it makes you want to take care of this place, which would make it actually hurt when it all got exploded later. I've been throwing around the term lost potential a lot, and I'm sure it's getting repetitive at this point, but it's really the only way I can think of to convey what I'm feeling about this series as a whole. There's a lot of genuinely cool ideas here that I'd love to sink my teeth into, but almost everything we see is surface level. We're presented with the base concept and nothing else. That's part of the reason why I think Chapter 3 is by far the best one. It's the only chapter where I feel that they not only presented their ideas, but actually explored them in a way that's interesting, which isn't something I can say for Chapter 4. They clearly want to be taken more seriously with all these corpses everywhere, but having serious ideas and themes doesn't mean you're actually exploring them. As a compare and contrast, let's take this scene from Chapter 3. There's a small moment where you're in these deep caverns and going through puzzles, and right at the end you come across Catnap, worshipping a shrine of the prototype that he's made. It's created out of the corpses of all the other toys that he's killed, and you see him crawl out of the darkness and worship it. It's a very small moment, and at first it might just seem like something creepy they threw in for fun, and to a degree it is. But this tiny scene actually tells us a lot. Firstly, it reinforces information that we've just been told up until this point. We've been told that Catnap worships the prototype, but this is showing us that in a very direct way. It also gives us our first real clue into what the prototype actually looks like. Sure, he's been hodgepodged together with a bunch of unrelated corpses, but we can assume that Catnap has seen his god before. And so this mystery gets even deeper as we try to decipher what he's trying to represent with this horrific menagerie. But even more than reinforcing what we know and giving us a hint to the future, this actually characterizes Catnap in a very subtle way. We've known since the start that Catnap is dangerous, but this shows us that he has a level of intelligence that we as the player might not be expecting. He's not just a wild animal killing without reason. He made this, which means that he can think. He's able to reason and understand things. And as we walk away, he vanishes, leaving us in suspense as we process that the animosity Catnap holds toward us might be a little more personal than we first realized. And again, this is a really small moment, but it makes excellent use of its time. It's there for a reason, and it tells us a lot. Now let's move away from this shrine and take a look at this pile of twisted human corpses we can find in Chapter 4. In various playthroughs, I've seen people kind of fawn over this moment, saying that it's an indicator that the story's getting really serious now, but I don't know. I understand it's a bit of a novelty to be seeing a human corpse as opposed to one of the bloody toys, but let's be honest, this isn't that much worse than the violence we've already been seeing. I don't know, this feels almost bland to me. All of these guys kind of look the same, and they're in really weird poses that I don't know how they could have died in. But even beyond how I personally think it looks, I have to ask, what is this moment actually doing for us, story-wise? We already knew there were going to be a bunch of dead bodies down here, or at least their chewed-up remains, so why is this a revelation? And on top of that, why are all these bodies here like this? Did someone put them here? Did they all just crawl in here and decide to die interlaced with the piping? And if someone did put them there, why were they arranged in this way? Was it the doctor? Was it all the little evil smiling critters? Did we somehow do it and lose our memory? This whole area just feels so weird. And you know what you do in this area? You squeeze past the bodies, pick up a key card, and leave. And you never come back, and no one talks about what happened to these people. It really feels like this was just put here to shock people, to be a big spectacle, something you can point to and say, wow, wasn't it crazy when that happened? And, you know, that's fine. You can just have a big spooky moment if you want. No one's gonna stop you, and plenty of people will think it's cool. But I think that if your spectacle has a reason behind it, that just makes it even better. We could have learned that this is the doctor's hobby, that he just likes twisting bodies into weird shapes. Or we could have learned that the smiling critters not in the safe haven have this weird culture. Or something, I don't know. Hi, editing llama here. Sorry if my voice sounds weird. I did not warm up at all, but I just wanted to pop in because I just came up with an idea that's better than both of the ones I just said. Because I was thinking about how all the bodies look the same, and so then that got me thinking it'd be less obvious that they were the same if they didn't have heads. And then I remembered, like, Yarnaby's child's whole thing was taking the heads off his toys and switching them around. And so now my idea is that, like, Yarnaby has this shrike behavior where he'll just, like, rip the heads off of the things he hunts and switch them around, or, like, store them in places. And then as you're going through the level, you just find all these random heads in really, really weird places, and you're like, what on earth is happening? But then eventually you realize that it's Yarnaby who's doing it, and that's what he does to you when he catches you. I think that'd be a really cool concept, and I know it contradicts the scene that I wrote earlier, where Quinn's behavior didn't remain after he was turned into Yarnaby, but it was a really cool bit of imagery, and I wanted to share it with you all, so here we are. I hope you're enjoying yourselves, and yeah, back to the video. Thank you. And now you might be saying, well, Llama, you don't technically do anything in the catnap shrine section, but it fits within the narrative and gives you more information beyond, oh, that's really creepy. And you know why Catnap did it, because he's a crazy toy who worships an even crazier toy. All of these bodies here are just here for shock value, and I think that's a bit of a waste. Also, this is a minor nitpick, but I don't think those bodies should be looking like that. It's canonically been a decade down in a basement with, like, no food. Those guys should be picked clean. There should not be a shred of flesh on those bones. But you know what I think isn't a nitpick in terms of criticism? It's something that's a problem in this chapter, but in all honesty, it's something that's been permeating the entirety of Poppy Playtime. Just something simmering beneath the surface. And that problem is that it has not been addressed once in this entire series why we are even here. Why is the character we play as even coming back to this factory? I can understand in the first and second chapter, we don't know a lot about ourselves. We only know basic stuff, like you used to work there, and these monsters don't like you very much. That's fine for early stuff. But we are 4 chapters in to what is probably going to be a 5-chapter story, and we don't know anything. And that's a big problem, because how are we supposed to feel and connect with anything if we don't even know why we're there? Because the thing is, other characters think they know why we're here. Poppy thinks we came back to find out what happened to our coworkers. The doctor thinks we came back because we cared about someone. But those are just their assumptions. We don't actually know anything. And I know that Mascot Horror has this big thing about keeping information hidden because that's what FNAF did, and it doesn't matter that FNAF didn't do it very well. Now everyone feels like they gotta be mysterious all the time. Like, I can understand the desire to keep big information hidden. Mysteries are fun sometimes. But lately, it's been feeling like a carrot on a stick. I thought Chapter 4 was going to give us something, because Chapter 3 felt like a lead-in to that. The character we play as does not talk. They don't even seem to react to what everyone else is saying all the time, so we have no insight into who they are or what they're feeling about any of this. But Chapter 3 includes a moment where for once we do get that introspection. There is a nightmare sequence where we're exploring the subconscious of the person we play as, and I think it's easily one of the most compelling parts of that chapter. It gives us so many interesting little tidbits to chew on, and I wish that Chapter 4 had continued in that vein. But no, instead, it just gets more and more unbelievable that we would ever come back. And were we a terrible person who helped experiment on kids? Or were we just an innocent nobody? Because at this point, it feels kind of important for us to know whether we're just an average person or the scum of the earth. That feels kind of relevant. This dream sequence is so good because it suggests that there's so much more to know. It gets you thinking. It pulls you in because you want to know what's happening. What's up with us? Why are we haunted by guilt? Why did we actually come back? And I really love it for that. But Chapter 4 does nothing to build on this, so the only real conclusion we have to this introspection is that we don't actually know anything.
Do you have any idea what you're doing? Do you know what's happened here? Do you know who we once were? Do you see why we have to end this? Do you even know what's real? No, you don't.
You! What did you do? Why did you kill Doey? Do you even understand what happened?
No, you don't.
I completely understand the desire to have your story be somewhat mysterious. I understand how compelling and cool it is to have a secret thing you want to reveal at the last minute. But I think this is revealing itself to be a problem because at this point, it's just been so long since we've really known anything about ourselves. So it's that much harder to connect with the story in a meaningful way. And from a more meta perspective, an audience needs time to process new information. If they're planning on revealing everything about us in the last chapter, I don't think it's gonna hit as hard as it could have, because it's just going to be so much all at once. I think it would have been better if this chapter revealed what Poppy's deal is, and also revealed what our deal is. Imagine if we'd found out who we were and why we were actually back at the factory at the end of this chapter. Do you have any idea how much excitement that would have fueled? How much fan art people would be churning out? How much DLC they'd be willing to buy? How much more invested they'd be in our character and their relationships with everyone else in this world if we actually knew why we were there and what our whole entire deal was? It would have been so cool, and it would have made me so happy. But instead, we are very close to what is the end of the story, and no one knows why they're even there. So our ability to care about what's happening is severely limited. And it's kind of starting to leach into how the entire world of the story feels. Because the story isn't as strong, it gives us time to think about the world at large, and it's starting to feel like it's full of a bunch of holes. Like logic holes. Poppy Playtime has never tried to be a realistic game, but as time has gone on, I think it's fair to say that they want their world to feel grounded in some sense. They want to be taken seriously. They want you to think about what an actual tragedy this would be. And that is really good. But it also makes me think about how this world would actually work. And in doing so, I came to the realization that this entire operation was constantly on the brink of a massive security breach at basically every point. And I'm trying to suspend my belief, but there are some things that I just can't get over. Like, you want me to believe that literal, actual thousands of children went missing and no one noticed? I feel like that's a little much. People get skeptical when the number of FNAF victims gets above 2 digits and you're telling me that actual thousands of children went missing and no one batted an eye? Like, I'm sorry, I cannot take that at face value. And I'm really trying to get on board with this new direction, but when they're bringing up stuff like the science of cloning and embryology, then it just becomes so much harder to believe that they could have hid this entire operation somehow. Like, in Chapter 3, there's a really effectively creepy moment in a VHS tape where a kid was going to be adopted, but turns out he was put into testing instead. And it's really effectively disturbing, but at the same time, did you guys not have some sort of tracker on who was getting adopted and who was set for testing? Did you not have some sort of fail-safe in case you wanted to test a kid who had parents, potential parents, coming to see them? Like, you didn't even give Stella a script for if this happened? Apparently you didn't, because now you've got two extremely upset prospective parents who are not just gonna let this go if you shrug and say sorry. And I understand that this is supposedly a big company, but hush money only gets you so far. Like, I'm sorry, it doesn't matter how much money you give someone. People talk. That's just a thing people do. Even if you killed these specific two parents, if this is a repeat incident, one of your thousands of employees is going to say something. This big shot in Chapter 4 with all of these dead toys is a fantastic shot. And it shows that, wow, this was crazy. This is so much bigger than we thought. But if every single one of these dolls was once a living child, then you're proposing that hundreds of thousands of children went missing, got shoved into a meat grinder, and no one noticed. And I just find that so hard to believe. And I understand that the game is saying that they're orphans, so no one would miss them. But first of all, that's really insulting to anyone in your audience who happens to be an orphan. Thanks for that. And secondly, there's more than just parents that take care of a child. People have brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, distant cousins, grandparents. Like, even if they aren't able to take them on and care for them themselves, they'd at least try to keep track of them, right? And that's not even taking into account, like, neighbors and just people they knew in passing. And again, even in the case that there was no one for a specific child who would miss them, this place has thousands of workers. You'd think that after years, someone would look around and go, wow, a lot of our kids aren't getting adopted, but a lot of them sure do vanish without explanation. Are we just supposed to accept that they're not gonna say anything? And I understand that their general way of dealing with this would have been to kill their employees, which, whatever, they're an evil corporation, makes sense, makes them fittingly evil. But that also would make people suspicious if you did that more than, like, 3 times. In one of the security tapes, they say that it won't be so easy to cover up the fact that 60 visitors died. And it's good that you're acknowledging that it would be hard, but acknowledging that it would be hard does not actually explain how you managed to do it. And I feel like that's an important thing to explain, because even if we assume that the company had a bunch of money, they're still just a toy company. They're not a government institution or a military branch or something. They're a toy company. And maybe you're like, no, Llama, it's fine. Kids disappear all the time. Literally half of my elementary school class disappeared and no one batted an eye. Even if you believe all that, this isn't just about thousands of theoretical children. This is about the many, many people we canonically see die during the hour of joy. Hundreds, if not thousands of employees all vanish in a single day. And these are not just nobodies you can say would disappear without a trace. Playtime Co. was going under, so they wouldn't have had the money to keep everyone quiet, and even if they did, everyone's dead. You could maybe convince me if it was like an isolated team of 15 researchers, the last dregs after everyone started leaving. But no! We see how many people die, and it's a lot! People have husbands, and wives, and brothers, and sisters, and children, and friends outside of work. You're telling me that every single one of them just vanished, and everyone they knew was like, oh yeah, the last time I saw them, they were headed towards that workplace that they hate, and no one tried to investigate the factory? And maybe you're thinking, oh, they looked but they couldn't find anyone because they dragged all the bodies down below to eat them. But that doesn't work because the orphanage that the parents were visiting to look for kids is deep underground. So they already knew that Playtime Co. had this weird underground setup, so they definitely would have gone and looked there. This whole thing just makes no sense, and try as I might, I cannot bring myself to believe it. I know this all sounds kind of mean, and I'm sorry for griping about it so much, but this is just the stuff that I think about. When I want a story to be good, these things stand out to me. I really like Onward as an emotional story between two brothers getting closer to each other, but I was so extremely distracted during the credits because the implication of magic coming back to their world has extreme socio-political implications that they're just not gonna address, and they're cowards for not showing us how the centaur could drive a truck. Listen, I know I'm complaining a lot, and that probably makes it seem like I just really don't like Poppy Playtime, but that's not true. There are things I like about it. I like the monster design. I like that each chapter is striving to be bigger and better than the last one. I think the mystery of who we are has been dragged on for way too long, but it is compelling and I want to know what happens. There's a lot of good ideas that I would love to expand upon with my imagination. I just wish that the game itself also expanded on it. And I think it would help them to tell a clear story if we also knew Playtime Co.'s reason for doing this in the first place. In the first chapter, it was pretty clearly implied that the experiments are intended to extend human life, possibly even gaining immortality, which is honestly a pretty unique concept for a mascot horror game. Or at least, it's a different twist on stuff we've seen before. But then in the next chapter, it's implied in the game that no, that's not what they were trying to do. They were trying to make factory workers / glorified guard dogs, which, you know, it's a change, but whatever. But now we're circling back to the immortality thing, and it really doesn't help that a lot of this information is only available in the form of ARGs. It's another area where story information that would get people invested is not readily available, and I really feel like it hurts the experience. I know that this genre has created its identity around the idea of hidden lore, and I really don't mind hidden lore. It's fun to discover new things. I am a fan of mascot horror and the fun mysteries we get to partake in, but I'm also an artist, a storyteller. I like to make things and I like to share the things I make, and I think it is a better audience experience if they know why they should care about things. Get them attached to someone, make a MacGuffin that's really cool, actually give us clues to the mystery so we can try to come to our own conclusions and see if we're right. I really like this series and I want it to succeed, and I feel like Chapter 3 was a great glimpse into how amazing all of this could be, but Chapter 4 feels like a stumble, and we didn't get to explore any of the stuff we might have found interesting. Because you know what the real kicker is? The end of Chapter 4 is so compelling. It's so interesting. Kissy's scared animation when Ollie turns out to be the prototype reveals more about the prototype than anything anyone has said in this chapter. It better conveys the danger of the situation than I think anything else this entire time has. And that gets me. This ending scene is so well done and so interesting, and it makes me want to know what happens next. And I wish that the whole chapter was full of moments that made me feel like that. I wish this felt like a grand finale rather than a really good send-off to a chapter that's kind of dragged. There's so much room in this world for cool things to happen and for there to be a compelling story to get attached to. And I really want that to come to fruition. Chapter 4 is not as good as Chapter 3. It's a major step back in storytelling, and it makes me nervous about the future and what the ending of this series will be like. But you know what? I'm holding out hope. I really, really hope that the next chapter brings everything together and makes something amazing. Because I know that Mob Entertainment has it in them. I'll be honest, I was kind of disinterested in Poppy Playtime after Chapter 2. But Chapter 3 pulled me back in and got me invested in a way that nothing else in this world has. And I want this to be so good and so jaw-dropping, and I know that they can do it. So I really just hope that they're able to come through and give us something amazing. And I'm willing to wait for it. When I say take as long as you need, I mean it. Take 2 years, take 4 years, take 5. I don't care. You have the ability to make something great, and you should. Don't pull the teeth out of your story. Don't cut corners. Just take your time and tell the amazing story that I know you can. And I hope that the next time I make a video about Playtime Co. and this crazy mascot horror game, that I can have amazing things to say about it. And thank you all for watching and coming on this journey with me. And I hope you had a good time. The script for this video honestly kicked my butt a little bit, so I'm happy to finally have it out and about and in the world away from my brain. I might try and do something a little more casual for the next video, but we'll see. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I hope to see you all again soon. Bye!